We are live. Welcome, everybody. I am Mark Mahaly. This is the House Committee on General and Housing. I'll get the date right. This is Friday, the 10th of January. We have testimony beginning at 10:45. And until then, I just want to go over a few things and do some housekeeping. For those of you who are new, our Magali, our committee assistant, think of her as our partner. She's just not my assistant, she's our assistant. She keeps track of all our bills that come in, come out. She'll maintain a spreadsheet in addition to the bills, for those of you who are new, that come in are put on the in board. And then as we move through them and hear them, if we choose to, they go to the out board. Bills that's called coming off the wall. Some bills never make it off the wall. She schedules our hearings. We give her thoughts as to who we want to hear from. I've been doing that consulting, but I definitely and very much would like each of you to react or think about things. When we catch our breath a little, I'll tell you sort of what's coming up, what are the areas we want to get into, and if you have ideas for people who should come talk to us, I would really appreciate your thoughts. I want a diversity of testimony before us. Magali also keeps our agenda up to date as much as she can, and it's on the website for the Housing Committee. And that's the place for it. If you prefer a paper agenda, you should let Magali know and she will provide it to you. Otherwise, we'll stay electronic. Witnesses bring documents in with them and they're instructed to please bring them ahead of time, supply them electronically so they can be posted under documents on the website. So you'll be able to see those. Magali will keep us kind of generally apprised of what's happening and is in charge of assuring a quorum. Please do not abuse that. It means that if we're going to convene, be here. But if for some reason you can't, tell us, tell me, tell Magali. You can tell Ashley. If you can't get hold of one of us, you should, Emily, just generally communicate. It's important to communicate. And watch your email or your texts. If you get a text or an email from Magali, you want to read it. I mean, it's definitely going to be something you should know, like, please get yourself in here. We don't want her running around looking for people. Because we can't do business if we don't have a quorum. Don't abuse the relationship. Don't ask Magali to do extraordinary things for you without checking with me first. And use her email at the moment, right, Magali? Yeah, just use email. And she sent you all stuff, so you have her email. And she's not your gopher. She's not gonna. So you're in charge of your own cups, dirty cups, or whatever. So just quickly, I'll run the meetings. If I'm absent, Ashley will run the meeting. If you want to speak, just stick your finger up in the air or catch my eye, and I'll write down your name in order that I see it and then call on you. We really want to have, an orderly discussion. Please, it's a small room. Don't talk. Side conversations are not going to work during here. And by the way, you should be aware that any conversation you have is picked up. So as now, we are And we are having a public meeting and people watch. It's surprising for the people who are new. I'll tell you, it's amazing how many people are watching, and everything you say is, so to speak, on the record. When people testify, this is sort of like a judgment call. I urge you, when you have questions, when you stick your hand up, it's important. And I think for almost any witness, if you have a question, you can ask it at any time. You don't have to wait till the end. You can ask a question. If you're going to interrupt their testimony, I urge you to make the question relevant to what they're saying right then. In other words, don't just interrupt it for whatever your crazy idea you might want to talk about is. But the most important thing, I think, is I really urge your questions to be real questions, not a sort of hidden statement. It's information, stuff you want to know. I wouldn't generally use questions to make a point. It's to pull out information. You don't want to interrogate or be aggressive. And then when the witness is finished, we'll bring it up to us here. And that's a good time for you to say, well, she said this, but this is what I think. I want people to feel very free to express that kind of opinion. And just don't do it in the guise of a question. Yeah.
So even if we just want to get somebody to say something on the record, since it's all, is that all right?
That's okay. That's definitely okay. People have to leave the room. If you have to leave the room, well, first of all, I'm gonna make sure that we have like once an hour a break, so that if you have to leave sooner, if you have to leave, just stick your finger up for me and let me know, I'm departing.
Oh.
Okay, bye.
He's a magical chair. He just knows.
I'm not gonna comment on my own letter on the record. And beyond, we have a lot to do. It's gonna be tight in this committee, our hearing time. We'll start hearings today, obviously. And we'll brief you on coming hearings and what's going on. It's two-way, so react. If you have thoughts, hey, why haven't you heard from, or whatever, tell us what you're thinking. There's up on the board there's a 2-month calendar. Stuff will be on that, just for your information. On Tuesday, we generally don't meet on Mondays. We're off on Mondays. I would check your calendar and your phones on Monday late in the day for what's coming up on Tuesday. I want to keep this room reasonably neat, please. So at the end of the day, would you, throw away your paper and stuff like that? Also, if you like to have I notice a number of you have cups and stuff like that, you can put in your well if you can. You have files, and you also have a filing. Each person will have a file drawer. And if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. Anyway, we do need a committee clerk. We have a vice chair, Ashley, and we have a ranking member, Emily, but we need a clerk. And that's up to us to choose. Do we have any nominations for clerk? Yes.
I would like to nominate Representative Mary Howard for clerk.
So Mary Howard has been nominated. Are there a second? Has that been seconded? Are there, Madam Howard, do you accept the nomination if you are approved?
I did.
We wouldn't want to take the time to vote if you were just going to. You didn't want.
If I may, that means that it might mean some late evenings. If we're here late voting on.
And we're going to be voting, yeah.
Oh, I understand. I stay.
Well, any other nominations?
Sundays.
Well, then could I have, by acclamation, is there any objection to the election of Mary Howard as clerk? Hearing none. My congratulations and condolences. You are. Are there, Magali, what have I forgotten?
I believe that's everything.
For those of you who are new, just by way of process, when a bill, we decide to hear a bill and we hear it. And then it comes time when we can vote on it. It has to be a bill we have possession of, which means that it's been referred to us either directly by the chair. You heard the speaker refer bills to committee. Well, a bill, if it's referred to us, we have possession of it. It may come to us from another committee because it's relevant to us too. Once we have it, it goes up on the board. When it's on the board and we decide to hear it, we have a hearing. At a certain point, we'll have a vote. We vote on the bill, and then Mary, as the clerk, records the vote. She also will call your names. I guess alphabetically. And me last. I'm last. I think it's alphabetical.
I thought, is it the way it's written on the sheet? I forget. I think it's a sheet, but
Okay,
I forget.
Yeah, there is the sheet.
all right.
Usually.
And so you vote, she records the vote. Then we assign one of you to be the reporter of the bill. What that means is if it's a bill that came to us, it's like really a housing bill. That's going to be a major effort on the part of the person who reports it. They really have to go into it and stand up on the floor and do it. If it's merely some bill that is primarily another committee's bill, and it came to us because it has some element of importance to us, we'll still assign it to one of you. The person, let's say this bill was assigned to Tom. What Tom would do immediately is send an email to Nigel, the assistant clerk. We'll go over this at the time. And that email would say, H121, I, Tom, am the reporter for H121. And the vote in the committee was 11-0. And do we send here, this point of information, do we send our draft, our version to the clerk at that point? Yeah, okay. I don't think we did that with the proof, but we may have. And then you send a copy of the bill.
We don't.
We do, well, if it's
Like council
changed,
does.
if it's changed,
Let's council.
Yeah, it comes, but we don't, we
ourselves don't do
personally
that.
don't have it,
we don't do it. Okay.
but they have it.
They have it. Fine. We'll get into that in more detail. And then you send that to Nigel, the same, right then, it literally, and then he'll acknowledge it. And then you'll be called on the floor to present.
And the other thing that I learned last year was that you can ask Ledge Council to write a summary for you. So you don't have to, you can do it yourself, but you don't have to.
The only other thing I'd say is we may be holding hearings around the state at some point, and I'll definitely fill you in more when we know more. But I think this issue is so central, the housing issue is so central that we may want to talk to people where they are rather than making they come to us all the time. So it is now 10:45. And
She'll be joining us momentarily.
Is she joining us on Zoom?
Yeah.
Okay, so, and it is, golly, who is it? It's
Julie
from
Lowell.
Public, what?
Julie Lowell.
Julie Love.
Can I ask a process question?
Sure, if I know the answer, I might respond.
Well, it's a chair decision.
Yeah,
How will it be decided what bills are taken up?
um. I haven't thought about that. I think there will be. I guess it's a what?
She's joining.
Great. It is a chair decision, but I think I would always consult with people. I mean, there are bills that I don't think will come off the wall. We have to focus on issues which are really important. Julie is. So our first witness is Julie Lowell from the Public Assets Institute. Julie, welcome to the Housing Committee. Can you see us?
I can, yes. Can you see me?
Yes, very well, and we also can hear you.
Great.
So I'm Mark Mahaly. Welcome to the Housing and General and Housing Committee. Could you tell us your name for the record, and please proceed with your testimony.
Yeah, great. Thank you for having me. I don't know, is it helpful if I share screen or do you all have slides in front of you?
Share your screen.
Okay. As soon as I get permission, I will. But in the meantime, thank you for having me. I'm Julie Lowell. I'm the Economic Security Policy and Outreach Director at Public Assets Institute. Public Assets works on state fiscal policy to improve the well-being of all Vermonters and to advance racial and economic equity. Just give me 1 minute. Okay, I think we're set now. So Public Assets is working toward a Vermont where everyone in the state has economic security to last a lifetime, that they have access through all of life stages to cash, strong public goods, wealth or asset building, and an equitable economy so that they can be financially secure. State policy can ensure that everyone in Vermont can meet their basic needs, not as a crisis response, but really in a comprehensive, sustained way so people can live fulfilling lives. And today, as you know, I've joined you to talk about the housing landscape in Vermont. This is an incredibly pressing policy area right now in Vermont, as too many people are living on the streets and others are struggling with the costs of housing. Housing is such an important public good to ensure that everyone in Vermont can realize economic security. And it's also something that Vermont state statute, through the people's budget language, requires our spending and revenue policies to address. So in our newly released State of Working Vermont report, which was just released earlier this week, we found that housing costs in Vermont are continuing to grow and they're becoming more out of reach for even more Vermont families. So the chart on the screen right now is not a Vermont specific figure, but what you can see is that rents and home ownership costs in New England at large have increased more quickly than inflation over the past 4 years. For renters specifically, we saw a significant jump in median rental costs during the pandemic, even after adjusting for inflation, which is the chart you see here, which caused destabilization for a number of families. Median rent increases since this chart, and 2023 is the most recent data we have available, have slowed, but we know that still more households are cost burdened compared to pre-pandemic. And part of that is because the mix of units below the median level has changed. So what is on the chart now is the median cost of rental units, but the mix of units that are below this have changed so that there are fewer units available to Vermonters with the lowest incomes. And so what this means in practice for households is that in 2023, over 50% of households who had incomes under $75,000 were paying more than 30% of their household income on housing. And if you look just at renters, which is on the right-hand side, the 2 bars on the right-hand side, you can see that in 2023, it was closer to 2/3 of renting households were in unaffordable housing. So in total, about 74,000 households with low or medium incomes in the state were paying more than they can afford for housing. And we know that there aren't enough affordable housing units in Vermont, whether that's if we're looking at the distribution of units or from the experience of the Vermont household. As rental costs continue to be out of reach, we've seen more and more Vermonters experiencing homelessness. Last January, a one-day point-in-time count showed nearly 3,500 people in Vermont lacked permanent housing, nearly 3 times as many the number in 2019. And this represents the 4th highest rate of homelessness of any state in the US. So shifting a little bit from renting to homeownership, the costs have also become really prohibitive in the homeownership market. So the numbers here, we use Vermont Housing Finance Agency's numbers on median home price. And so they reported that in 2021, the median home price was $260,000. And that rose by $55,000 to $315,000 in 2023. So when you pair that increasing median home price with rising interest rates on mortgages from that same time period, the cost of getting into a median priced house is increasing. So interest rates went from a little under 3% in 2021 to a little under 6.5% in 2023. And the impact on a family in trying to get into this house as a new homeowner is over $11,000 more expensive in that first year of homeownership for that family.
Julie, question for you.
Sure.
But this chart is pulling it up to me. I notice in this chart, the green insurance band stays pretty constant. We've been reading that insurance rates are going up. What do you think? Is any comment on that? What 24 would look like? Would you see a bigger band there, or 25?
That's a great question. We pulled from our methodology behind this chart looked at used what Vermont Housing Finance Agency estimates for their insurance costs. And so I know Maura's coming on later. It might be a good question for her, but we sort of went with their basic methodology around estimating insurance costs.
Okay, thank you.
I have been hearing the same things, and I am very curious to see. So the impact of the higher interest rates, though, it's not just an extra out-of-pocket costs, but at the end of that first year of homeownership, we're seeing that people have less equity in their home. So your outlay is much larger in that first year in 2023, but at the end of that first year, you have about $1,800 less in equity compared to 2021. So lots of differential economic impacts as the cost of home ownership goes up, in addition to the rising interest rates. So largely driving these increased prices in the housing and rental market is a lack of supply. And so this chart shows numbers from the Housing Needs Assessment. And Public Assets took these numbers and we visualized them in this way so you can see how many units Vermont brought online from 2019 to 2023. Where we fell short during that 5-year time period, and this is about 10,000 units spread over that 5 years. And those units were needed to normalize vacancy rates, address homelessness, and replace destroyed homes. And then on the right-hand side of the chart, you can see what's projected in the next 5 years to catch up with demand. And this is a range from sort of the low to the high end of 15 to 25,000 units to meet those new population demands and projections. So kind of the high end of this estimate is about 35,000 new units to make up for the unmet demand and the new demand. And so it's pretty clear here from all these data points that Vermont can and needs to do more to address these housing needs. So in the next slide, and the last slide I'm going to share, you'll see that of Vermont's $8.6 billion budget in fiscal year 25, a fairly small portion went to housing. There are other housing dollars that come into Vermont that don't go through the state budget, but in 25, we spent approximately $170 million went towards housing, around 2% of the state budget. So making some reasonable targeted investments in housing can make a really big difference for Vermonters. And I think the state really is going to need to step up. We're hearing that from a lot of different people are acknowledging this. But just this week, the Burlington Housing Authority shared with community partners that in calendar year 2025, the Federal Housing and Urban Development Division provided them information that they'll likely not provide enough funding to cover the cost of rental assistance for the current Housing Choice Voucher recipients. So these are housing vouchers for households with the lowest incomes. And this means that they are currently suspending vouchers for those who are currently looking for housing, and it could potentially impact those who are currently housed with a voucher. So the state really needs to step up to fill some of these federal holes, or we're going to see our current homelessness crisis further exacerbated. So as we think about new investments,
We have a question here. Go ahead.
yes,
So it's my understanding, that is of great concern to me, the vouchers, in my community, and have been hearing from folks about that. It's my understanding that, that's based on congressional inaction. And so, asking, so how would, in your opinion, the state would have to fill those gaps for the congressional inaction? I just want to be clear that that's something that was a federal inaction, not something that the state.
yeah, and I absolutely, and I think, you know, we've seen in years past how the state has issued some like stopgap, like year vouchers that are sort of carry people through until the federal landscape improves. But I think it's just one example of what we don't know exactly is going to be coming down from the feds. And so
It's definitely something that's weighing heavily of concern. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So as we think about new investments, we need to consider a new approach. And so currently our approach to housing is piecemeal in the state. We don't guarantee everyone has access to public resources. People who qualify on paper for housing assistance or for certain programs, they don't necessarily receive it because of a lack of available spaces or units. And others who are in need of affordable housing, they don't necessarily meet the criteria for programs, even though they're struggling financially. So as we consider new investments, we need an approach that keeps our promises in statute to ensure housing for everyone in Vermont, so that everyone in the state has housing accessible and to meet their needs. And so some of this is going to be multifaceted housing solutions with appropriate services and price points for different subpopulations. People who need mental health supports, are struggling with addiction, or who have developmental disabilities. And the housing needs to be built in an integrated way with the rest of the community. We know there are many migrant workers who are currently living in substandard housing. And even if we increase the housing stock so that there was enough supply, this particular population doesn't have the proper legal protections to access the private rental market. Also to keep in mind as we're thinking about these investments is that historical inequities in accessing home and land ownership have meant Vermonters of color have been unable to access wealth building through home ownership in the same ways that others have had access to. So this has created a racial wealth gap and led to economic inequity. So some targeted housing policies that address the impacts of these historically racist policies are going to be really important. So that's kind of begins to give you a little bit of an overview of the landscape and how public assets is seeing the data and thinking about this. And thank you so much for having me join you today. I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Does the committee have questions for Julie? Please go ahead.
I just have a suggestion. Wouldn't it be, would it be all right if we went around the room and introduced ourselves to Julie?
You know what? I should have done that. I'm
That's
sorry.
okay.
We did that every day, every time we had a witness. Please, let's start.
I'm Ashley Bartley. I serve Fairfax in Georgia.
Joe Parsons, I represent the towns of Newbury, Thompson, and Groton.
I'm Charlton. I serve Athens, Chester, Grafton, and Wyndham.
I'm Debbie Dalton. I represent St. Johnsbury, Concord, and Kirby.
I'm Gail Pezzo. I represent Colchester, District 20.
I'm Mary Howard, and I represent Rutland City, District 6.
Hi, Julie. I'm Elizabeth Burrows, and I represent Windsor 1, which is Heartland, West Windsor, and Windsor.
Hi, Julie. Sonia Lamont, and I represent Lemoyle, Washington District.
Emily Krasnow, South Burlington, Chittenden 9.
And I'm Mark Mahaly, and I represent Cowlitz, Plainfield, and Marshfield. And missing right now is Leonora Dodge. I do have a question, and I don't know if you can answer it now, but I'm interested in data on the house, on the differential between the cost of producing a unit and what people can afford. Do you have any data at Public Assets on, that's current on what it costs to produce a unit? Or any data on what different cohorts can afford?
We don't currently have data on this. I know I recently spoke with Erhard Manka about this at the housing conference in November, and I think the Housing Conservation Board and VHFA might be
Right.
the best folks. But yeah, this is an important question because it depends on what type of unit and if it's a multifamily unit or a single use. That's something we could look into, but not something I have data on right at this moment.
Another question, and please let me know if anyone else has questions. Another question. In the chart that you showed that shows projected housing needs and unmet needs in past years and future years,
Mhm.
for the future, do you assume, what kind of assumptions are you making about in-migration? And by way of background, I think it's the whole in-migration question is complicated because people tend to be wealthier. At the start of migrations, the people who tend to be wealthier, but then that changes over time. And we are, some people are projecting climate-based migration and even some political migration. What kind of assumptions or look at that issue that Public Assets done?
So we pulled these numbers straight from the housing needs assessment. So this is really their numbers that we visualized in this way to help us begin to understand them. And so these are based on migration patterns during the pandemic and before, and sort of giving that range of the low end and the high end. But I don't believe it takes into account sort of all those what ifs that you laid out in terms of climate migration and political migration.
Well, I think I'm going to be able to ask that question of another witness in the immediate future.
Yes.
Thank you. Are there any questions by other members of the committee? Well, Julie, thank you so much for taking time. Much appreciated.
Thank you for having me. Next time I'll try to be there in person. All right.
Thank you. Our next testimony is scheduled for 11:15. I think what we should do is take a 5-minute break at this point. Let's try to be back here by, or maybe 7. Let's try to be back here by 10 after, and we can maybe start the testimony just a little early. Thank you. We'll take it offline until